Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Allen Memorial Art Museum's webinar, Fighting with Fruit, Resisting Slavery and Racism in Still Life Painting. My name is Alexandra Letvin, and I'm the Assistant Curator of European and American Art at the Allen. And it's my great pleasure today to introduce our speaker, Professor Shana Klein. Professor Klein is Assistant Professor of Art History at Kent State University and the author of the fascinating book, The Fruits of Empire, Art, Food, and the Politics of Race in the Age of American Expansion, published in 2020 by the University of California Press. In it, Professor Klein draws on her PhD research conducted at the University of New Mexico to discuss how representations of fruit in the decades after the American Civil War offer insight into some of the nation's most heated debates over land, race, and citizenship. Professor Klein has been awarded numerous prestigious fellowships from the Smithsonian American Art Museum, the Huntington Library, and the Henry Luce Foundation, among many others. She has shared her research widely, both in print and digital publications and on podcasts. We are so delighted to host her here today, and we'll begin today with a pre-recorded video of her talk, which will then be followed by a live question and answer session. So at any time during the talk, you're welcome to type your questions into the question box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll look forward to discussing them in just a little bit. So thank you again for joining us today, and Professor Klein, we'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much. Before I begin, I just want to extend my gratitude to Jill, Alexandra, also Andrea for supporting my research and for inviting me to take advantage of this opportunity. So here we go. So the title of my talk today is Fighting with Fruit, Resisting Slavery in the Still Life Paintings of Robert Duncanson. I want to start by discussing how a few weeks ago, in January of 2021, historians of American art were geeking out when Dr. Jill Biden chose a painting by Ohio artist Robert Duncanson to be displayed during the swearing-in ceremony at the United States Capitol building. In a country fractured by politics that seemed to run as deep as the continental divide, Biden chose an optimistic painting by Duncanson. On the right-hand side is his trademark rainbow shooting off like a firework into the sky. In this painting of cotton candy clouds, slow roaming animals, and green pastures, Duncanson flaunted his mastery of picturesque conventions. And so, Duncanson gets a lot of deserved attention for his landscape painting. But what of his earlier still life paintings that show just as much mastery, technique, and a lot of drama? Duncanson's choice in still life objects are mysterious. He painted pineapples, lemons, honeycombs, foods that were expensive or hard to access, and other foods that were politically meaningful to debates about slavery and citizenship. How might Duncanson have been using still life painting as a commentary in his own cultural moment of political division? Duncanson's still life paintings are the subject of my talk today, but before we dive into his artistic practice, first let's ask, what is a still life painting? Still life is generally defined as an arrangement of inanimate objects on a table. Okay, so that doesn't sound very exciting. Still life is a genre of art literally defined by lifelessness, by inanimate matter. Many artists were attracted to still life painting for this very reason. So objects such as cups and pots, they were cheap and they were affordable to paint. They also didn't move, allowing an artist to study to paint the object for uninterrupted periods of time. Because still life painting was viewed as a mere exercise in duplicating reality, it wasn't viewed as very interesting. Even scholars today prefer allegorical or figurative painting, genres of art that were considered more dignified, more complex. But I want to dismantle all of these prejudices for you today. I want to show you how still life paintings of food are in fact very exciting to study, and they were politically charged. Robert Duncanson came to still life painting by way of painting houses. As a teenager, he painted houses and signs that might have triggered a desire to become a fine arts painter. Wanting to pursue art professionally, Duncanson moved to Detroit and then Cincinnati in the early 1840s. Duncanson would have been attracted to Cincinnati because it was an emerging art center, and it was also home of the Western Art Union, that was an organization that promoted American art. But more importantly, Duncanson would have wanted to live in Cincinnati because it housed one of the country's largest populations of free African Americans. This no doubt helped his success since Duncanson was of African descent. Born to an African American mother and Scottish Canadian father, Duncanson was described in more than one census as a, quote, mulatto, a person of mixed racial descent. The prospects of finding art patrons then would have been better in Ohio than in a state located further south. Duncanson experimented with the still life genre early on in his career with my favorite painting by the artist. We're looking at Fruit Piece from 1849. He painted cherries, strawberries, gooseberries, two colored varieties of currants that teeter off the edge of a table. Bigger fruits sit more solidly in the background, showing a range of textures from the raisins' velvety skins to that prickly crown of the pineapple in the background. Duncanson approached still lifes of food like the human body, painting knobby lemons that resemble women's breasts and walnut shells that look like the grooved cortex of the human brain. You can see that here in this close-up of that kind of nippled lemon and that grooved nutshell. Duncanson relished in painting food. He took advantage of every opportunity to depict the most meticulous details, down to these tiny reflections of light that hit the cherries and the studs in every strawberry. Duncanson didn't paint these pictures out of a vacuum. Like many American artists, he was surely inspired by earlier Dutch still life painting. Now, the Allen Memorial has a great example by the Dutch artist Jan David Stahim. The artist painted a goblet half full of drink, porcelain bowls brimming with fruits, prawns, and a lobster whose lifeless claws surrender over the side of a plate. Now, in my classes, I describe these scenes as frat parties. Okay, these are tables set for a raucous, rowdy time. And compared to Dutch painting, American painting was not as wild. Still lifes were much more subdued and smaller with more modest arrangements of food. But artists like Duncanson showed just as much facility, earning critical praise and awards for his fruit pictures. All the vibrancy, all the sparkle that we're looking at in this painting, however, it dissolves when he paints another picture with the seemingly same pineapple, which is now rotting. That pineapple is balding and has frayed leaves. The grapes have also become pale and hollow, and the velvety raisins have turned brittle. There is a dead fly located in the lower right-hand corner beyond the white plate, enhancing the theme of decay. Looking at these paintings together signals to me that Duncanson was painting foods from live models, since he shows these fruits like the pineapple aging and rotting over time. In other words, Duncanson's paintings demonstrate a close firsthand study of foods that do not look like mere copies. Duncanson's fruit paintings were likely inspired by his resident city, Cincinnati. This was a center for fruit in the 1800s. In the 1830s and 40s, Cincinnati was a pioneer in horticulture and pomology. Located on the Miami and Erie Canal and Ohio River at a nexus linking north, south, east, and west, Cincinnati was a major depot for transporting and manufacturing food. It was also a hub for local horticulturists who refined hothouse technologies that enabled the cultivation of fruits outside their natural season and climate. Now, Duncanson might have showed these results, the results of these experiments in paintings that combine summer cherries and peaches on top of winter apples and quinces. This incompatible combination spoke to fruit growers' ability to cultivate foods out of season. Duncanson took great pleasure in picturing bounties of fruit. He piled the fruit so high in this picture that they spill over the edges of a bowl and tumble onto the table beneath. The picture plane can barely contain all the cherries, peaches, and plums. Duncanson, in short, did not need to look far beyond the bounds of Ohio for still life inspiration. Duncanson might have wanted to paint fruit because Ohio's leading fruit growers were also the city's leading art patrons. Andrew Ernst, Nicholas Longworth, and Freeman Carey were a few of the region's established horticulturists who were also active art collectors and members of the Western Art Union. An 1843 lithograph records their activity in the Cincinnati Horticultural Society. The men pose around a table adorned with plates and baskets of apples and grapes, a testament to their passion for fruit growing. They believe that cultivating a taste in fruit, like art, would produce a cultivated and enlightened public. Now, the city's leading fruit grower was this guy, Nicholas Longworth. He was the city's also most generous art patron. He supported the careers of several artists in Ohio, including Duncanson. Duncanson paints a portrait of Longworth in 1858. He shows the 75-year-old sitter in front of a curtain drawn back to reveal his most prized possession, his vineyards. These vineyards are glowing in the light of manifest destiny, as if this stolen native land was entitled to Longworth and bestowed upon him from God. Longworth stands confidently in the picture. He leans one hand on a table at right. Grapevines curl around the table's edge, highlighting his career as a vintner and grower of the Catawba grape, after which an island off of Lake Erie is named. Longworth was so committed to educating the public on fruit cultivation that he allowed the public to visit his personal greenhouse. This is where residents like Duncanson might have viewed pineapples for the first time, something as, quote, exotic or tropical as the pineapple. Longworth also sent his wines abroad to artists in the hopes that they would introduce Longworth wines to Italian merchants. So it's possible then that the very fruits in Duncanson's earlier still life paintings were grown and given to him by the city's fruit cultivators, who also doubled as the city's art patrons. Now, Duncanson painted a portrait of Andrew Ernst. He operated one of the earliest nurseries in Cincinnati. And so he shows Ernst with the gardener's spade at right. It's a little bit hard to see. We only have a reproduction of the painting. And we see a table of apples and pears on his left. Ernst grew more than 600 varieties of these fruits. Duncanson also painted a portrait of Freeman Grant Carey. He was a fruit breeder and nurseryman who founded Farmers College, which you see in the background of this portrait. This was one of the first agricultural colleges in the United States. Duncanson's paintings of fruit may have appealed to the city's leading art patrons because they were fruit growers, like I mentioned, but also because they were sympathetic to the plight of African Americans in Cincinnati. Ernst was well known for housing fugitive slaves at his Spring Garden nursery. Freeman Carey was rumored to have used Farmers College as a station for the Underground Railroad, and Longworth advocated for abolition, and he was rumored to have saved a runaway enslaved person in his wine cellar. In their nurseries and wine cellars, the very spaces where fruits were cultivated, so too were the seeds of freedom for some African Americans. Duncanson's still lifes may have also advocated for the abolition of slavery. So let's look a little bit more closely at his still life paintings, because one food that really stuck out to me in his work was the honeycomb. Honeycomb was rare in American still life paintings of the time period. I mean, I really cannot overstate how rare it was. I have devoted my entire life to studying still life paintings, and in all of the images that I have inventoried, I've only found like a handful of still life paintings of honeycomb, and they date several years after the Civil War. So why would Duncanson display this food, which was so unconventional in still life paintings of the period? Well, I discovered that in antebellum America, honey held great political significance. Around the mid-19th century, abolitionist societies wanting to abolish slavery, they promoted honey as a more ethical alternative to cane sugar and molasses produced by slave labor. Advocates of honey contributed to the Free Produce Association, which wrote newsletters like the one I'm showing that encouraged people to boycott all foods produced by slave labor. They hoped that boycotting slave-labored foods would weaken slave-labored businesses and make consumers more socially conscious of what they were eating and how their food was produced. Now, this movement also had a strong base in Oberlin. So I'm showing you an excerpt from a report that talks about how we are never to taste or wear any more of the sugar or cotton in the production of which slaves have been wept, groaned, and scourged. We are cheered by the fact that in the Oberlin Collegiate Institute, this testimony has been embraced by most of the faculty and students. So Oberlin played a role in this system as well. In addition to honey, activists promoted sorghum syrup, beet sugar, and maple sugar as more honorable alternatives to white sugar produced under the umbrella of slavery. And many famous figures supported free produce sugar, including Harriet Beecher Stowe, Frederick Douglass, and the Grimke sisters, one of whom famously served free sugar desserts at her wedding. I love that anecdote. The idea, imagine having at your wedding like the most ethically sourced sugar in your desserts. The free produce movement reached the height of its popularity in the 1840s. This is the same moment when Duncanson painted a honeycomb. Duncanson was no doubt familiar with the political connotations of honey, since Ohio was a hotspot for the free produce movement. Slave-free sugar was produced in Cincinnati's sorghum mills. It was sold in its free produce grocery stores, and one store that was operated by the famous abolitionist Levi Coffin was also located near Mount Pleasant, Ohio, which is where we think Duncanson lived at one point. Painting honeycomb at the height of the free produce movement in Cincinnati was therefore meaningful. Maybe the artist painted honeycomb as a nod to the movement and to the patrons who supported this cause. Now, let's not overlook how Duncanson painted honeycomb beautifully. Okay, he showed honey oozing out from every cell of the comb. It drips, slips, and stretches into the corners of the gold rim plate that enhance the honey tones of the painting. The golden apple at left echoes the blonde coloring of the picture. Depicting honeycomb would have been a fun experiment in painting for Duncanson. It allowed him to flaunt his mastery in both color and texture. But it's not just a fun exercise. Honeycomb may have also given Duncanson the opportunity to support the free produce movement, which was active in the very city that he lived. Duncanson would not have been the only artist to acknowledge the free produce movement. So a decade later, Eastman Johnson, he paints a maple gathering in his picture Sugaring Off from 1865. So this was a tradition characterized by celebration, community, and courtship. The art historian Brian Allen, he describes how the sugaring off ritual was a party in the woods. This was attended by farmers, villagers, celebrating the first batch of collecting maple sugar from sap. It's no coincidence that Johnson paints this during the Civil War, and he includes Union soldiers in his painting, highlighting the affiliation between slave-free sugar, abolition, and the North. Now, maple sugar had been long hailed by political figures. Benjamin Franklin, he portrayed it as a more ethical replacement to sugarcane labored by enslaved people. Depictions of maple sugar and honeycomb point to the fact that food was a political battleground for artists. I'll say that again. Food was a political battleground for artists that they had to negotiate on canvas. And I should also quickly mention that the boycotts I'm discussing are not unique to the North, that Southerners also participated in boycotts, and they shunned any foods or objects that were, quote, tainted by Northerners and abolitionists. Now, I was so excited to discover the connection between abolition, sugar, and honeycomb. This connection really forms the foundation of my argument. But I will also admit to you the major problem in my interpretation, something that few scholars would ever like to admit, right? Rarely do we like to admit the flaws in our research. But consider this. If Duncanson wanted to promote or support the free produce movement in his still life of honeycomb, then why would he also include a pineapple in the same painting? Unlike honey, which was known as a food protesting slavery, pineapples were well known in the 19th century as slave-labored foods. They were harvested on plantations in the Caribbean and Central America by Indian, African, and Asian enslaved laborers. Many abolitionists, as a result, view tropical fruit as products of sinful slavery, and they boycotted tropical fruits to try to injure the slave industry. Poems in abolitionist journals screamed the evils of tropical fruit, including a verse I'll now read to you about a mother who warns her daughter against drinking sugar tea, against eating oranges and apples. The poem says, "I told you those fruits which you valued so much, though tempting their look was pollution to touch. They were raised in a land where the labor of slaves has borne many thousand away to their graves. Alas, when I place the sweet cup to my lip, the tears of the Afric are all that I sip. Oh, what for a moment's enjoyment would crave, did they think it was mixed with the blood of a slave." The association between food and slavery is not subtle here, right? Consuming sugar and fruit was to consume the blood and the tears shed by those in bondage. This forced readers to connect their personal eating habits to those who grew and sold fruit supported by slavery. If pineapples were products, even celebrations of slave labor, then this poses a challenge to my argument that Duncanson used honeycomb as a denunciation of slavery. Perhaps I can reconcile this by the fact that Duncanson's pineapple in this painting is frayed and dying. Duncanson does not show a vibrant or dignified portrait of a pineapple. He shows a rotting pineapple with balding skin and frayed leaves. Next to it stands brittle grape stems and that dead fly on the cracked table that sharply deviates from the golden, succulent honeycomb. Might the rotting pineapple, the dead fly, the cracked table, could they have all been a metaphor for the moral rot, for the broken system of slavery? Or I offer another alternative. Maybe Duncanson's pineapple was not even produced by slave labor, but by Longworth in his famous greenhouse. We know that Longworth sent fruits to artists. He gave the fruits to the public and access to his greenhouse. The pineapple then might be redeemed in this painting by having little association with the systems of slave labor. Though admittedly, I will tell you, Longworth's fruits would have been entangled in other uneven systems of power and power dynamics, given that they were harvested by exploited immigrant labor. So while you can drive this interpretation, this argument in several different directions, I simply want to reinforce that it's vital to investigate the origins of food in still life painting, because artists like Duncanson were deliberate in the foods that they painted, and viewers felt strongly about who labored those painted foods. Now, not only was food political in the 19th century, but fruit in particular was racially charged. Like people, fruits were assigned attributes of race and nationality in the 19th century. Apples, for instance, were considered a uniquely American fruit, reserved for the most patriotic dishes, while pears were considered pompous European fruits, too aristocratic for American tastes. Planters devised ways to, quote, naturalize immigrant fruits on American soil, echoing wider debates about naturalizing immigrant people in America. Grapes especially provoked conversations about racial identity. One vintner, Peter Mead, he argued that mixing grape varieties created a terrible infusion of blood that will pollute the whole race of the fruit. These are his words. Another horticulturist, Andrew Jackson Downing, he suggested that growers raise new generations of grapes in the American soil so that they will then get American constitutions. These quotes reveal how fruit was framed in terms of race, nationality, and citizenship, just like people. Fruit was also discussed in terms of skin color and complexion, with fair, dark, or even mulatto-colored skin. This may have inspired another Ohio artist, Lily Martin Spencer, who painted a range of skin colors with pictures organized entirely around the complexions of cherries, currants, and raspberries. She provides a sliding scale between dark to light-hued berries. Duncanson too explored a variety of skin tones. He painted hybrid colored cherries and white-skinned strawberries in the foreground of Fruit Piece. So I was particularly struck by these white or light-skinned strawberries in the painting. This might actually represent the pine berry, a white or yellow-colored hybrid strawberry. Now, I point this out because in a society that is so deeply stratified by race and skin color, it is not surprising that debates over racial mixing infiltrated all areas of life, including fruit. Was Duncanson aware of these conversations? Would he have thought deeply about the skin color of fruit? What might it have meant for someone who was considered a mulatto artist to be painting a, quote, mulatto colored fruit? These questions deserve deeper thought, given that fruit was a major inspiration for artists, both Black and white, and inspired conversations about race and slavery in this time period. I want to end my talk by thinking about what happens to still life painting as debates about slavery intensified and then simmered with the ending of the Civil War. Pennsylvania artist Severin Rosen restores peace and optimism to still life painting in his picture from the late 1860s. This picture, by the way, is at the Allen Memorial. It shows fruits from the North and South and also from different climates, once again joined together on this table, portraying a cornucopia of food that translated to a picture of national peace and abundance. Not here are dead flies or rotting pineapples. Also not here are the meticulous touches of the individual artist. Rosen cranked out still life paintings like a factory. He managed a workshop of assistants who repeated the same fruits over and over again. Perhaps they were working from a template. Still life painting exploded in popularity after the Civil War, and it was also disseminated widely in mass-produced prints, so no longer just paintings. The foods in still life depictions changed after the Civil War as well, so more depictions showed tropical fruits as they grew more accessible to American consumers with innovations in refrigeration and icebox technologies. In all ways, still life representations of food experienced an industrialization after the Civil War. But that did not make still life depictions any less political. Food continued to inspire conversations about labor, race, and citizenship throughout the 19th century. Every food from honeycomb to pineapple, they carried cultural meanings that extended far beyond a fruit's nutritional value. The meanings of food were not lost on Duncanson or on Rosen or their patrons who were visually literate and politically sensitive to the subject of food and art. So I hope then that my research brings more attention to depictions of food. I want listeners to leave this presentation today with the knowledge that still lifes of food are not as straightforward, they are not as innocent as they seem. Duncanson's fruit paintings are a perfect example of this, revealing how American artists gave viewers much food for thought on the political landscape of the country. Sorry, I couldn't resist inserting a last-minute food pun. I try to avoid them, but sometimes it's unavoidable. I also want to conclude this presentation by encouraging you, if you're interested in this topic and want to learn more about the kind of afterlife of still life paintings around the Civil War and beyond, please consider looking at my book. I just published it. It's called The Fruits of Empire: Art, Food, and the Politics of Race in the Age of American Expansion. Academic books can get pretty expensive, so I've included my discount code here. And also consider following me on Instagram. I have an Instagram account called The Fruits of Empire. And this is where once a week or a little bit more frequently, I show a picture of food and art and explain its meaning. Thanks again so much, everyone. I look forward to your feedback and your comments.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Klein. That was really a fascinating talk. I learned so much about Duncanson and also kind of Ohio history, which as a recent transplant is always kind of fun to learn about. And I just wanted to kick things off. I want to invite everybody to please use the Q&A box. I see we're getting a lot of questions already, which is really great. You mentioned at the end of your talk that the research you presented today is related to your book, but it also kind of departs from it. And I noticed some fruits in Duncanson's paintings kind of play a starring role in your book. And I was just wondering if we could start things off by, if you could tell us a little bit more about your book project.
Sure. So yeah, the Fruits of Empire evolved from a class that I took when I was a graduate student at the University of New Mexico. I was really interested in representations of the banana in Central American art and how that could apply to my own expertise in American still life painting. And once I started seeing the banana in the late 19th century and all these still life representations, I couldn't unsee it. And so it kind of planted the seeds for my book project on the racial politics of food and how food intersected with ideas about expanding the American empire. And I have 5 chapters in my book that are each categorized by a specific fruit. So I have a chapter on the grape, which of course Duncanson painted, the orange, the watermelon, the banana, which he never painted to my knowledge, and the pineapple. And so I talk about how these fruits continue to be really politically charged and racially loaded, and continue to press upon a lot of these conversations about who is laboring these foods, who should have the privilege of cultivating America's fruitlands and beyond. And I should also say, you know, I'm not making a cent from this project. All of the royalties for this book are going to be donated to the Coalition of Immokalee Farm Workers. It's a civil rights organization that helps secure better working conditions and fair pay for our farm workers.
Great, thank you. So we have a couple of questions related to this kind of question of audience for Duncanson's paintings. So Andrea Durstein, the director of the Allen, asks, she says, magnificent talk. Do you know who originally owned these 2 paintings and or much about those who purchased Duncanson's work during his lifetime?
Such a great question, Andrea. So one of the challenges of studying Duncanson is that there is, first of all, little information about the artist. And second of all, that information that is available is oftentimes contradictory. So even just like simple biographical information about Duncanson's parents have been like hotly debated. So we don't have a lot of information about who owned these still life paintings. The information that we do have is that they were actually award winning. So he won awards for some of his still life paintings. We also know that I believe he got into the Western Art Union with one of his still life paintings. And so it's almost as if we know how still life painting was a vehicle for success in his career more than we know about their afterlife, who exactly owned them. I'll also tell you that the still life painting with the honeycomb that's now at LACMA at Los Angeles County Museum of Art, that was gifted by a family with the last name, I think, Honeyman. So I would assume that they were attracted to that painting because it resonated with their own last name. I know that also one of his other still life paintings was actually purchased by someone in the sugar industry. I don't know if it was the honeycomb painting, but I think that also lends itself to some inquiry, right? Because sugar was so loaded. So I don't know what part of the sugar industry they were involved in, if it was, quote, ethical or not. But I wish we had more knowledge of where these paintings ended up, who purchased them. We know a lot more about his landscapes than we do his still lifes.
Great, thank you. We also have a couple of different questions about European still life paintings, which you mentioned in your talk. So Marcia McCoy asks, did Dutch still life fruit paintings also involve political issues of the time? And she acknowledges this is outside of your area of study, but we're just curious.
I love that question. They were absolutely inspired by Dutch still life painting, and Dutch still life paintings were equally political. One of the most inspirational pieces of scholarship that I used and borrowed from for my own book project is a book by Julie Berger Hochstrasser. She is a Dutch still life art historian, and she talks about the kind of exploitation that runs behind a lot of these still life representations, where these tropical fruits were coming from in the Caribbean were based off of indentured servants and slavery and systems of, lopsided powers that were at play. And so just like I interpret that in the context of American still life painting, you can certainly make those arguments in Dutch still life painting too. And I think for that reason, there are a lot of really rich connections between the two empires.
fascinating. So Ryan Grover asks, I was struck by the contrast of rotting fruit from enslaved labor with the presentation of free produce honey as a type of preservative. I wonder if the artist was making a pun on the end of slave labor.
I'm trying to think if I understand the question or the comic. So it sounds significant. If you can.
Let me see if I can find it again. I think it might disappear from me once I answer them. Okay, I was struck by the contrast of rotting fruit from enslaved labor with the presentation of the free produce honey as a type of preservative. I wonder if the artist was making a pun on the end of slave labor.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I quite understand the idea about like using it as a pun. I think like that could very well be possible, but certainly, I'm trying to make the connection that these fruits are rotting, fruits that would have been produced by slave labor, as opposed to this beautiful, rich, delicious depiction of honeycomb, which is not depicted in such a negative fashion. And so I wonder if that is meaningful, right? That's something that I address in the presentation, because it does seem like the foods are being treated deliberately in different fashions.
Yeah, definitely. It's really quite striking. And I was thinking about kind of the comparison to Dutch still life paintings, and in those you often have these kind of vanitas elements where there's a fly or something is dying, but it's just a very small part of the scene, versus Duncanson's painting where it's so prominent. So
yeah, I mean, I would argue from my understanding of Dutch still life that they really had like a larger spectrum of what they were addressing in terms of those memento mori vanitas paintings, where they even showed like candles being fluffed out or like skulls on the table. I don't see that as much in American still life painting. There's a vanitas trend in a lot of American still life paintings, but they don't seem to be as obvious.
So we also have kind of a lot of very specific questions about the fruit in the painting that you discussed. Well, actually, not just the fruit. So one question is about the peanuts. Is there any significance to the peanuts?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I love his representation of nuts, right? Duncanson has those really rich grooved walnuts. He also shows hazelnuts and a listener observed at the peanut. And I'll answer that question by saying that I don't want my scholarship to end there. I don't want this to be the last word on Duncanson's still life paintings. That if anything, I hope this inspires other scholars and other historians of art to run with this. Like, someone tell me the history of the peanut and like why it might be significant in American still life painting. How could representations of tomatoes or avocados in American art be meaningful? I hope that this is kind of paving the pathway, maybe in the same way that other scholars have paved the path for me to continue to explore the meaning of food in art, because it has been a historically neglected study, and I think that it bears so much meaning.
Absolutely. So another specific question is about the pineapples. So Lisa Strong asks, are there different varieties of pineapples? And if so, do you know which variety Longworth grew? And perhaps could that help proving the pineapple in the 1849 still life might be from Longworth?
First of all, hi, Lisa. Lisa Strong has been a mentor of mine and very supportive of my work too. She's at Georgetown right now. That's a great question. I hadn't considered that. In my project, I have had a lot of fun reaching out to people who are vintners, horticulturists, people who are experts in orange varieties. And I haven't actually connected with anyone who's an expert on the pineapple from a scientific or a horticultural perspective. So I wonder what they would say. The banana, we really only ate like one variety of the banana in the United States in the 19th century. And so I wonder if the pineapple was similar, like maybe there weren't many varieties like there were the grape or the strawberry. So that's something I definitely want to think about more. But certainly I think that, in my presentation, I talk about how this pineapple may have been sourced from Longworth. He may have been growing this in his greenhouse or his hothouse. And so as someone who is very experimental with fruit cultivation, I would love to know if Longworth was cultivating a certain type.
Definitely. And Lisa says that they miss you at GU, sorry.
Yeah.
Let's see. So Margarita Carasulas asks, she says, fabulous talk. I wonder if you can say more about your research on Severin Rosen. She's curious about him in particular, given his own immigrant status coming from Germany.
Hi, Margarita. I think Margarita is in Brooklyn. And I wouldn't be surprised if her institution had a Rosen, because wherever I go, Rosen follows. Like, it just seems like every institutional collection in the United States has a Rosen painting. He was just that prolific, which is also why we talk about how he kind of worked like a factory. Like, he had all these apprentices who maybe have been working from these templates, because he, again, was so prolific and produced so many still life paintings that all kind of end up, in my mind, and this is not to denigrate him, but end up looking very similar, almost identical. And so he was a German immigrant. He was working in Pennsylvania. And I think that he's also reflective of a moment in which it's a lot of European immigrant artists who are working in the United States who are helping to popularize still life painting. Because we know from Dutch traditions, also Spanish traditions and beyond, that European still life painting, it was a genre that was very popular in Western Europe. And so a lot of immigrant artists are bringing that tradition over here to the United States and also helping to make it popularized, though we do have kind of more, quote, native American artists who are working on this genre before immigrant artists are coming over here. But it's certainly helped by European immigrants.
Sure. So we have a question from Christina Clay, or Clee, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. I second the magnificent talk comment. In addition to the racial implications you note in Duncanson's still lifes, do you see any signs of gender issues or women's rights in still lifes of the late 19th century? She's thinking in particular about Lily Martin Spencer.
Yes, so I think about it all the time. That is such a great question. And the author is escaping me, but there's someone who's written scholarship about Claude Reguette Hurst. So this is a female, a woman still life painter of the 19th century who does bachelor still life paintings. So still life paintings that have more like stereotypically masculine objects. Think like cigars, a stack of cards, gambling materials, alcohol beverages. And this was really unconventional for a woman to be painting still life representations of manly content, of manly matter. And so still life representations, as much as they are racially charged, they are certainly entangled in conversations about gender as well. And I should also say that one of the reasons I was attracted to studying still life representations is because they're almost like more democratic than other genres of art, that they were permissible to women and artists of color to portray and to paint, as opposed to the nude figure or more what were considered more dignified genres of art, like allegorical painting, that were not historically encouraged among women artists and artists of color. And so it's almost like there's something more accessible about still life representation. And so for that reason, they should be considered like such a useful artifact to study women artists of the 19th century. Lily Martin Spencer's still life paintings are some of the most gorgeous, and she was depicting fruits that are so like rich in color, like blackberries, and we saw those, yellow and red raspberries. And so while my research has been more focused on race, there are definitely so many avenues that you can take still life painting on when it comes to gender as well.
That's fascinating. I mean, I think you've really shown us how a genre of images that perhaps lots of people think are kind of background images can actually make really important, really interesting arguments.
And if I can add one more thing, when it comes to the fruits in Duncanson's painting, in particular the strawberry, when he was painting the strawberry in Cincinnati, Nicholas Longworth, one of his later patrons, he was the strawberry man. And as much as he was like a pioneer of American grapes, he was also working with strawberries. And he created a hermaphrodite strawberry at a time when there were debates about strawberries' sexuality and their reproductiveness. And so even the foods themselves are also gendered in the 19th century and even through today.
Wow. Well, a question that's maybe slightly related. So this is from Marcia McCoy. Who says, you mentioned different colored grapes and the racial overtones associated with them, and then the caveat against mixing grapes. Do you know how long this aspect of grapes was associated with race and racial color? And of course, these issues of racial color and discrimination extend well after the Civil War.
Yeah, so another scholar whose work that I'm indebted to is, I believe she's in American Studies, the field American Studies, it's Erica Hanikel. And she talks about how different grape varieties throughout American history were always talked about in terms of their purity, their racial purity, the purity in terms of how they were grown, the purity of the laborers who produced them. And so this is something that's not unique to the 19th century, that I think there are anxieties really over the purity and the kind of racial makeup of the grape throughout the 19th century and into the 20th century. And that also extends beyond race to nationality. I mean, in 1970, in the 70s, we know that the world of grapes was upseated and upended when California won an award for California wines over Paris wines or over French wines. And so it's just attached to all of these conversations about cultural superiority and race and nationhood that extends way beyond the 1800s.
Wow. So Dana Hart Stone asks, how do Indigenous people fit into this story? So were native fruits painted into still lifes, and were Indigenous people included in the understanding of enslavement?
Yeah, so I showed briefly a picture in my presentation of Nicholas Longworth posing in front of this grand curtain to reveal back his vineyards in the background. And to me, that representation is a great example of how people painted manifest destiny into their art. That he's showing this landscape that looks to be divine. It has this divine golden light coming down, as if this landscape has been bestowed upon white Americans from God, part of this doctrine of manifest destiny. But of course, these are lands that have been stolen from Indigenous people. And so I talk about how cultivating grapes, cultivating fruit is this imperial process, right? It is connected to renaming fruits and taking away their Indigenous names and giving them more, white American names, whatever that might mean. It's also the process of changing the landscape. You're modifying nature when you grow these foods, and you're growing them on stolen land that you're then claiming as your own. And so it's part of this larger imperial adventure, or that I should say venture, that is a way of trying to naturalize the theft of Indigenous land. And also you can have another conversation about Indigenous people as the people who harvested grapes. Historically in California, for instance, the grape industry was helped by enslaved Native Americans. And so that is a component that is definitely vital to this topic.
So thinking about kind of America's territorial expansion, Chris Wu asks, is there a difference in fruit imagery from California, Florida, Central America, and Hawaii, where much of the fruit is grown, versus art from other parts of the US?
Yeah, so that is really the topic of my book project. And I would argue that no, still life representations from the places where these tropical or semi-tropical fruits are grown are very little different from what you see in New England or New York. And I say that in a way that feels dangerous, right? That these conventions have such a stranglehold over what art and empire look like, and that what they do is they serve to, again, naturalize and gloss over the unfair working conditions of the people who are producing these fruits, who are completely edited out of the picture plane, right? That's really what still life paintings also do. They don't show figures, they don't show people, they don't show the people who actually produced and harvested them, as much as they don't show the people who were consuming them. And so I think that this only emphasizes the kind of cultural work that is performed in these paintings to erase laborers from the picture plane and to not clue people into the destructive systems of power that undergird the way our food is produced.
Thank you. We have so many questions coming in. It's hard to keep track of them. I mean, it's just a sign of just how rich and fascinating your talk was. So maybe we have time for a couple more. Rebecca Van Diver asks, thank you for such a rich talk. I wonder if you could speak a bit about your inventorying of American still lives, and where is the most interesting place that you've stumbled upon one?
Rebecca, thanks for your comment. I also want to shout out, she has a fantastic book that was recently published on Lois Mailou Jones. She's an African-American woman artist, so definitely check that out. And the question was the inventory of images I'm working from?
Well, how your process of inventorying them, and then also if there was one place in particular that you were kind of surprised to find a still life.
Yeah, so I feel like I've been working on this project forever. I feel like I've amassed this huge catalog of still life representations from all of the archives I visited, from all of the museums that I've been studying. And I'd say that one of the most startling findings was that these still life representations that we know so well and so famously in New England, right? I'm working in a discipline in American art that is really focused on northeastern United States. But there are very famous still life painters who are working in California and Florida. And so I really hope that my project helps to expand that. And so some of my most, I'd say, rewarding findings is looking at objects, say, in the Huntington Library in California that show equally famous artists in California and beautiful representations that are coming out of the West or coming out of the South, and not just that historic center in New England, New York, that scholars have historically been, in my mind, a little narrowly focused on.
Great. So Sarah Yepson asks, it's interesting to me that Duncanson avoids some of the non-edible elements of still life images. So glasses filled with liquids, things like that, which we do see a lot in Northern paintings. Do you see this as a purposeful emphasis on food, as opposed to kind of the artistic and talent or ability needed to produce this materiality?
I also have to shout out Sarah. It's like I'm smiling ear to ear because all of my friends and the scholars that I admire are, participating in this talk. So yeah, Sarah, you make an interesting observation. Like Duncanson doesn't really represent beverages or drinks, and that was conventional. So that is something I hadn't considered before. Why is he not showing wine, for instance, but he does show grapes? Wine and cider were also objects that really incited debate when it came to temperance. Many temperance supporters warned against drinking any form of alcohol, including wine, saying that was like a dangerous gateway drug to more sinful substances. So maybe the kind of avoidance of alcoholic drinks or any beverage would have been to just like not touch on the temperance debates. And then what was the latter part of the question?
Sorry, I have to pull it up again. We have gotten so many questions. It's so yeah, it was do you see this as a purposeful emphasis on food? And I think part of it is this question of as opposed to kind of artistic talent, which I'm interpreting perhaps incorrectly to be the kind of how much you have to showcase your talent if you're showing like a liquid in a glass, for example.
Right. Yeah, so that would definitely have been a way to flaunt your skill. Showing a glass of water, for instance, if anyone's ever tried to paint water, it's, one of the greatest challenges. That very reflective, liquidity is not easy to translate on canvas. And so a lot of still life artists are showing wine, alcohol, champagne, and water in still life representations to boast their skill. So it is interesting that Duncanson doesn't want to do that. He's certainly talented enough to take that on. But I think that Duncanson is also strategic. So he wants to paint something that will attract patronage. And so perhaps even though Longworth is this well-known vintner, again, maybe to be diplomatic and negotiate debates about temperance, maybe he avoided the subject matter. But that's such a great question. I have to think more about that.
So one of your students, Diane DeFazio, asks, what are you working on next?
Thanks, Diane. Food studies has been good to me. I've liked skirting the different disciplines and shuttling back and forth between food studies and art history and environmental studies. And so I think the next topic that I'm really compelled to work on is milk. Now stick with me. I'm really interested in representations, not just of milk, but of breast milk. I have come across these kind of haunting Victorian representations, photographs of women breastfeeding and nursing while looking directly at the camera. And as someone who recently gave birth during the pandemic and knows what nursing is like and the labor that goes into it, I think it's really strange to want to maybe document or record that in a photograph, especially in the Victorian period, where stereotypically we think of Victorians as very buttoned up, not even wanting to show their ankles in public. And so to bare your breast and to look at the camera while nursing your child is something that I want to consider more in the greater context of milk and how milk and breast milk is represented.
That's really fascinating. I mean, exactly as you said, kind of thinking about how bummed up we think of, Victorian culture versus our own, but considering a lot of the stigma associated with breastfeeding in public.
Yeah,
certainly. So it's really fascinating. Well, I think we have time for one more question. I want to thank everybody for such fantastic questions. This was such a rich discussion, so thank you so much, Professor Klein. And we'll end perhaps with, why do you think Dr. Jill Biden chose the Duncanson painting for the inauguration?
Oh, wow, that's a great question. I mean, I think she was quoted as saying something referencing the optimism of the rainbow, that this was a sign of good things to come. I don't want to misquote her, but I think that was the gist of what she was saying. And I think that it's so meaningful that she chose a Duncanson painting that is so bucolic, that is so picturesque, right? There are not a lot of sublime elements in that landscape painting. It's really all cotton candy clouds and rainbows and this harmonious relationship between man and nature. And in this cultural moment, when there's not only political division, but when there is intense anxiety about how we're treating our environment, right? How our natural environment seems to be dissolving and disintegrating. And there's a lot of dystopian anxieties about what our environment's going to look like, and even just 10 years from now. I think it's interesting that she chose a landscape painting, and that it's also meaningful that it's by an artist who is considered Black, who's considered, quote, mulatto, and really trying to maybe hopefully have an administration that will help to more even the playing field in a culture that we all can acknowledge feels very unequal.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Again, thank you everybody for attending this webinar. Thank you, Professor Klein, for the fascinating talk and for this really rich Q&A. And I think we will leave it there.
Thanks so much. Bye, everyone.